Hello and welcome back to Empyrion Galactic Survival. My name is Spanj, and in today's episode I want to take you through how to build your own POI and add them to your game. Now, this is quite a complicated subject. I've done a few live streams where I've covered this in the past, but I'm going to try and cram everything into just one episode here. Here in front of you, you're seeing the Temple of Far, which is a POI that I did on a previous live stream. Now, POIs, in particular bases here, I'm not going to cover patrol ships, but we're just going to cover POI bases. They're just like normal bases, okay? And the first thing I would recommend you do is go into creative mode like I've done here. Just go into the blueprints library, scroll all the way down to the bottom until you start seeing a sea of red names. These are all POIs, be a radar station, rare supply station, Zeno spaceport, things like that. Just spawn them in. Just spawn them in there. And just have a look to see how they are built, how they are created. And you'll notice certain sort of patterns and stuff like that eventually. There's a few of them that have these filler blocks, which are these sort of blue-ish blocks that you could see here. And we'll sort of cover what they do a bit later and how to use them and stuff. But for all intensive purposes, filler blocks are just a way for the game to fill in that area with dirt and grass. And make it look like perhaps the top of the POI isn't as big as what's underground kind of thing. So, but that's in a nutshell. Yeah, just have a look at the current sort of POIs in the game, see how they tick, what's in them, how they work, the size of them, the kind of deco texturing and stuff. And you'll notice that there are sort of similar patterns here. All the POIs in the base game are kind of designed to be quite basic in how they look, be sort of either very easy to defeat through to quite difficult to defeat, but none of them are sort of impossible, and they're all made for single player. And the tougher POIs that you may have come across are probably come from user created scenarios like Project Eden, Reforged Galaxy and stuff like that, and other POIs like what I've created here, the Temple of Far. So, like I said, it's very easy to build a POI in principle, and like any good build, it just takes a lot of time to put in things like finer details, signal logic, traps, so on and so forth. But try and think about when you want to build a POI, what you want that POI to achieve for the player. What do you want the player journey to be? Is it a challenge? In which case, how much reward is in it for the player? How much effort to reward are you putting in? And that's why I suggest you look at existing POIs. Because if you're fairly experienced with the game, you know that the spaceport here is an incredibly basic POI that is going to be one of the first ones you take on. It's not armed, it's got some basic loot in it, and is a nice easy one to take over when you're in your first sort of days of survival. Whereas some of the more difficult POIs like drone bases and stuff like that, they have a much harder difficulty curve, but a much higher reward. Okay, so it's easy to get stuck into the trap of building a POI and just making it ridiculously difficult, and just like putting guns everywhere and just spamming spawners and things like that, and it's just not fun for anyone. You've got to try and build it with the intention of the player defeating it. How you guide the player into doing that is entirely up to you. Anyway, that's the sort of more advanced stuff anyway. Today we're just going to get into actually how to build a POI and how to add it to your game. What you then end up building with that knowledge is entirely up to you. So first of all, what you want to do is just build a base. So you're going to need your base starter block. Choose what kind of material you're going to build it out of. Bearing in mind, again, how difficult are you going to make it? Also, if you build the entire thing out of combat steel, are you giving that player a huge amount of combat steel early on in game? Now, I would generally suggest if you're building a ground-based POI, then build it on the ground. If you're building a space-based POI, by all means build it in orbit. If you build a ground-based POI in space, you'll have trouble with the center of gravity and the placement later on. So the simplest thing is to just build it where it's going to be. Now, I'm going to build a very, very simple POI here, purely for the purposes of demonstration. Now, I've placed my base starter block here, and I've put a bunch of sort of concrete there as well. What I'm now going to do is get rid of the core, and then I'm going to bring in alien blocks. Okay, now the alien blocks block gives you a number of choices. If you right-click on it, you can see we got NPC core. and MPC core admin. MPC core admin will be indestructible, so only use that if you're making an indestructible POI, like a trade station or something. So we're just going to use MPC core. And my base here is going to be very simple, a case of a corridor with a couple of traps in it, and a couple of spawners, and then the core, and that's it. Just so I can demonstrate to you how to build it. The other thing you might notice in here is all your loot containers are here, for your alien loot containers at least anyway. Alien turrets, particularly Xerax ones. There are other blocks, so you'll notice that the legacy turret is separate. Talon turrets are separate. So if you're building legacy or Talon, they're not under the alien blocks group. They're outside of that. Also, the POI hull is separate. Just bear that in mind as you're building. Some of the blocks might not be included under alien blocks. Okay, so here we go. This is the basic sort of structure of our POI. We have an entrance corridor, which we'll need to gain entry through somehow. And that leads through to the core ultimately, and where we're going to place the prize, which in this case is going to be a nice single red container. Okay, that is our POI in its most basic form. Now this isn't going to work, of course, because there's nothing in here. We need to flesh this out even more. But ultimately, the player journey is simple. Player starts here. First obstacle, open the doors. Once they get into the door, into the POI, what then? Where do they go? Build your POI, build a journey into it. In this case, they've got to travel this corridor. Then they get to obstacle number 2, 2 more doors. And also a decision, left or right. Once they get past that, then they're rewarded with the core and ultimately the loot. Now, it's not going to be that simple for the player. First of all, these doors are all going to be locked, and they're going to have to figure out how to get through them. The level of difficulty is entirely up to you, but obviously try and make it fun and somewhat of a challenge, maybe. What you do need to remember is that just like your own base, a POI needs power, and it needs fuel. Now, when that POI is spawned into the game, it won't run out of fuel, and until you blow up the generators, it will continue to operate. So you only need a single generator and some fuel tanks. Now, of course, you can actually build POIs to take CPU points into consideration, in which case you've got this MPC core with CPU in brackets. And if you're building that, then you will need to also include extenders for it to operate. Now, because I'm using the NPC core, it actually bypasses all CPU anyway. So, but, you know, just in case you did want to do that, you can. What we're going to do now is we're going to actually add some signal logic and spawners in here. What I want the player to do on my POI is actually enable a sort of backdoor hack into the POI in order to open the first doors. Then a second override switch will be inside that they have to hit in order to open the second set of doors. So what I'm going to do actually sneakily back here is going to create a little backdoor kind of room. I'm going to decorate this a little bit as well, but ultimately it's going to be something that the player, a curious player, a thorough player, will find. And as a reward, they will have an easier time getting in. Won't have to waste a lot of ammunition or C4 blasting through these heavy blast doors. Okay, so I'm going to put a nice little console here. I'm going to put another one just over here. But ultimately, the big thing that we actually want is this switch here. Okay, I'm going to place that there. And what I'm going to do is place a trapdoor single use. Now, this is something that if the player sort of walks up to, it will just break. It will break instantly and they can go through it. So I'll texture this slightly different. As you can see, it is already textured. It won't be that, but it will be slightly different. And ultimately, when the player sort of walks up to it and pushes themselves up against it, it will break through. They'll then be presented with this switch. Okay, little basic signal logic tutorial here. If you look at the device and press P, so we'll look at our new switch, press P, hit the signal logic tab. We're going to give it a name. We're going to call it backdoor. Okay, so that switch has two states, on, off. Very simple. We're now going to go to our front doors here. Now we have three large, heavy-duty blast doors. Now, they're going to be in this position when the player comes up to them, which means that they're going to have to figure out a way to get through 2,200 hit points, except if our thorough, clever player finds the back door and flicketh that switch, they will open, or that switch will open these doors. So what I'm doing here is looking at each individual door, pressing P under the Signal Logic tab, setting the open close command to the new backdoor switch that we just set, and follow, as in it's going to follow the state of that switch. Now, without power and stuff, I'm not sure if this will work, but if we flick that switch into the on state, these doors should open. Bingo. So, there we go. We have our backdoor incentive for the player to explore and look around, and then they get the reward of the front doors opening up. However, because I'm a bastard, what I am going to do also on this very same switch, let's get some lights. Let's get some lights because I want a nice visual indication that they've done something naughty. Although, yes, they will be rewarded by an easier entrance into our POI. What I'm going to do is I'm also going to set this new light on off to the backdoor logic that we just, the switch that we just set up. We're then going to set it to red, and we're going to set it to blink every 2 seconds. A nice sort of longish blink. I'm going to need the power in order to test this because I'm not sure actually what this looks like. So let's just chuck in a bunch of fuel on this thing and power her on. Flip our switch. There she is. And now this light is like red alert. Beep. Beep. Okay. So they have a nice sort of visual indication that something has changed by flipping that switch. Not only that, we are also going to put some spawners in here that are also linked to the same switch. So spawners under the alien block here, these are the thin plate spawners that you cannot see nor destroy. And these are the ones, these sort of, this red one here is the NPC spawner plate that perhaps you're used to seeing that you can destroy. I'm just going to use the thin ones because I just don't like the way these look, and they both do the same thing. Okay, you can't destroy that one, but when you're setting them up, you can configure them to only spawn a set amount. Okay, so these work just like how we configured the switch back there, but instead of going into signal logic, you just go into device. You then get all the parameters down the side here about how you want this spawner and what you want it to do. Okay, so actually what we're going to do is we're first of all going to go to the signal logic and link it to the backdoor switch and follow. Just like that. Now, these spawners thus will only switch on if somebody uses that backdoor switch. Great. Okay. What do they get? Well, that's up to you to choose. This is under the configuration here. We can say the amount that we want is maybe 2. And we want 2 of those little turret robot things as kind of like a emergency spawn type thing. You can even set dialogue and stuff, which I've not even ever played around with, actually. Okay, let's get these guys. So you'll have 4 little turret robots to deal with. If you use the back door, then blast your way through. What I am going to do, though, is I am going to add in an extra little gun turret here. Okay, and because this is a part of the backdoor system, we're actually going to turn it off if they use the backdoor switch. Okay, so we do the same thing. Go into the P menu here, go to signal logic, and we go follow backdoor. But we're now going to tick this one to invert the command. Okay, so although it's following the switch, when the switch is on, this will be off. When the switch is off, it'll be on. So if they blast their way through, yes, they won't have to deal with the turret robot things, but they will have to deal with this sentry gun. Okay, basic, simple traps. Now, we've got our spawners, we've got our turret. The last thing is the last little obstacle here, which we're going to have a nice little AND signal logic thing to deal with. So we're going to put 2 switches here, and we're going to call the first one door A. Nice and simple. Call the second one door B. Lovely. We're now going to create a new circuit called 2 times AND. And we're going to put door A and door B, and that produces doors. Let's call it inside doors, just to keep it nice and tidy and simple. Okay, so a 2 times AND, very simple. Both of these conditions must be met in order to produce this signal. Okay, so then we set our blast doors here to inside doors. Follow. This one is the same, inside doors. Inside doors is the signal as a result of door A and B being switched on. So we can switch one on, nothing happens. Switch the other one on, both doors open. Okay, switch one off, both doors close. Doesn't matter if you have to switch both of them on. So kind of like the 2 key situation in a nuclear silo, player has to turn both switches on in order for the doors to work. There is also a way to set that to a timer and make it all complicated and stuff, but I'm not going to go into that now. That is our very, very basic, simple POI. There we go. Okay, the player has a backdoor option. They can, if they find it, they can open the doors automatically, but then they will have to fight some turret robots. If they blast their way through instead, they will have to fight some fixed turrets. Once they then flip these 2 switches, they will then gain access to the core room and win the POI. Job done. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how you build a POI. Obviously, very, very hurried and very much a simplified version of the POIs. You can obviously go into much more detail, as you can see here, with the Temple of Far and beyond. There are some far more impressive, pardon the pun, POIs out there that you can look at and spawn in and see how they tick, how they work. I mean, the Temple of Far here is very simple in it, has some basic sort of signal logic in here. As soon as I enter this corridor, that pops out, the lights start flashing red, which you've already seen how to do. Spawners start going off. If we walk in through this door here, explosions happen and so on and so forth, because we've used signal logic pressure plates along with explosive blocks and other triggers and spawners and things like that in order to produce the POI experience for the player. And here we get trapped. We get shot a lot, more spawners, but we can escape. And then we start getting into rewards. So, halfway down, we get some nice loot containers if we explore a little bit. If we continue, we get into the main room where we get our code to open the final door. And ultimately, the prize, the ultimate prize at the end. So, a POI should have a journey. It should have a journey for a player to achieve. And that's what we've done with this very basic one here. We have a start, a middle, and a finish. And it's not just like a one big room full of spawners and turrets that's just going to kill them on sight. And that is essentially the very basic level, how to build a POI. Now, how do we get it into game? Okay, well, let's just quickly chuck some fluff on this thing so it's not a complete and utter embarrassment. I mean, it is, but yeah. Okay, so, and also before you save it, you want to put it in the state that you want the player to find it. It's quite important. So flip all the switches to the off position. Make sure any turrets that pop out are actually in, and make sure the power is switched on, and everything like explosive blocks and stuff like we just detonated over there. Make sure they're intact, otherwise you'll be spawning it in with all the explodey blocks exploded. So just get it into the state that you want the player to find it in, okay? And then you just do normal Alt-O and save as, and just do, I don't know, I'm going to call this a test POI. Okay, right. Just save it as a normal blueprint as you would. Now, it will appear in your blueprints list now in red. Do not panic. But you need to go into your blueprints list like I have done here, find your POI, and then double-click it. And you get these extra options come up. Blueprint group name is really important because that's what we need to add into the YAML file in order to add it to the game. Okay, so we're just going to call it test POI. Honestly. But this is also a really easy way to get your POI into the game because you can actually call it similar to other POIs already in the game. If you look again in your blueprints library at existing POIs, you will see similar patterns in the group name. For example, Creole main, there are 4 of them. Or minus T1, T2, T3, deposit marker. You will see that there are several POIs under a single sort of group. So, quite simply, if you're making a POI that fits into one of those groups already, then by all means, use one of those groups. And then you can very, very easily add your POI into the game, albeit it will be randomly placed somewhere in the scenario. But that is probably the easiest group name system to use. However, if you're just wanting to get it in, like I am, on a single sort of POI basis, then just call it something unique and something memorable. Also give it a spawn name. So that will be what it appears as in game. Ground offset, if you need to bury it, okay, 1 block is 2. So we want it to go down so it's flush with the ground. So I'm going to put in -2 so it sinks it by 1 block. Don't ask. Blueprint flattens ground, means that obviously the ground around the blueprint is flattened with it. And terrain removal, if your base is underground, it will remove the terrain from within the POI. Okay, my base isn't underground, okay, so I'm not going to tick that. But we had an underground segment, like we do with the Brotherhood, the Temple of Far over there. Terrain removal, I will set to switch on. Okay, that's pretty much it for what you can do with it in game. Just before we head out of the game and start messing around with YAML files, I've actually added some filler blocks around the outside here to ensure that this POI is perfectly rectangular. Because there have been historic issues where blocks like these that are not perfectly square cause terrain artifacts to happen. So just adding a layer of filler blocks around the outside makes sure the POI is perfectly rectangular and the game has absolutely no excuse whatsoever to screw up the placement of your POI. There is also another thing that we need to do before we head off. Do you see where the label for this POI is in the bottom right corner? We actually need to reset that position back to the center of this POI. This is called the pivot point, and it's where the game believes the center of the POI is, which is originally where we placed the core. It's really irritating because obviously we've moved the core, it's now over there, but it still thinks it's here, which means that when it goes to place it into the game, it's going to place the center of the POI here, and everything around it is not going to fit properly. So what we need to do is in the console, we need to do prefab info, the name of the POI, which in this case was test POI, and then clear pivot. It's case sensitive, so test POI, POI being in capitals, clear pivot, cleared the pivot of the base label still appears in the center here, but obviously if we respawn it now from blueprints, it appears in the center there. So yes, we will probably work now from this one rather than this one. Destroy this one, DI, destroy, then the ID number up in the DI thing, and then disable DI. But yes, the clear pivot the clear pivot command there is absolutely vital to make sure that your POI actually spawns correctly in the ground. Not so important for space POIs, but still worth doing in my opinion. But you do it against the saved blueprint, not the structure that's in front of you. Okay, now I think it's time to go and mess around with some YAML files. Now, first thing you might want to do before we start digging around YAML files is get yourself this scenario off the workshop. This was made by Mozo. Big shout out to Mozo, thank you so much for making this. But this is an incredibly basic, simple, single planet scenario, which is ideal for testing POIs out before you then add them to the main scenario. So great, get yourself this scenario because I'm going to use this in order to show you how to add it into YAML files and subsequently test. What's quite annoying is that once you've downloaded the scenario, you actually then need to extract it out of the back end of Steam and add it into your Empyrion Galactic Survival folder in order to then edit the scenario. Bear with me, okay? On Steam, under the POI challenge scenario, you can copy the page URL. Okay, copy the page URL into the address bar of a folder and it will tell you this number here. This number here is what you want. In this case, for me, it's 2014-428-546. Now, that might change for you. It might be a completely different number, but hopefully it's the same. I don't know. What you'll need to do then is copy that number out of there because you're going to need that. Open up another window, a file explorer window, and you want to go again to your Steam directory, Steam Apps, Workshop, Content. This is the fun bit. You need to identify which of these folders is your Empyrion Galactic Survival one. The easiest thing to do is just search content for the number that you just copied and pasted. However, in my case, I think it's this one here. And then I can modify, order by date modified. It is the latest thing that is downloaded, so it is got today's date on it, 2014, blah, 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 blah. This is the scenario, okay? So, I don't know if you followed that or not, but yeah, Steam Apps, Workshop, Content. This random number, again, might be different for you, but that seems to represent, for me, Empyrion Galactic Survival. Best thing to do is to search for the number from the URL, like I said, and it should find it. Once you get into this folder, you need to copy everything. Then go back to your Empyrion Galactic Survival folder, go to Content, Scenarios, create a new folder, call it POI Test, for example, and then paste into that folder everything that you copied from the Steam. So this will separate this scenario from the Steam Workshop one. And essentially what you've just done there is create your own custom scenario. Okay, you can go ahead and close that weird backend Steam folder now. We don't need it anymore. Now that we have our POI test scenario, we can actually then modify it as we see fit. Now, first thing that we need to do is actually bring the blueprint that we took of our test POI into our scenario. So from here, go back to Empyrion Galactic Survival, saves, blueprints, that number, and then your test POI folder. Grab the EPB file, copy, back to Empyrion Galactic Survival, content, scenarios, POI test, prefabs, and paste. Okay, you keep it up. Now we go back to just back one folder. Go back to POI test. Okay, so this is where all the magic happens essentially. So in this test scenario here, we have a single playfield. Actually, a lie. We have two. We have the orbit and the planet itself. So challenge is the planet. So if we go into playfields, challenge, we then are confronted with two YAML files, the dynamic and the static. The YAML file that we are keenly interested in today is the static. You will probably find Notepad++ particularly helpful here. If you do not already have Notepad++, I highly recommend getting yourself Notepad++. It will make this next step so much easier. Edit the playfield static YAML file. It will open into something overwhelmingly confusing like this. Bear with me. Okay. This is how a planet in Empyrion is built. It is a lot of lines of nonsense, okay? Just scroll past all of the nonsense until you see the words, or letters rather, POIs. You then have underneath that all of the POIs that will spawn or could possibly spawn on the planet in question. Now, because this particular scenario that I've made you download here is so very, very basic in that it's just for testing POIs. There's very little here, which makes your life a lot easier. Okay, this particular section, which is earmarked with challenge POI hashed out in green, is the bit that we are interested in. At the moment, and at the time of subscribing to this scenario, it currently says Drone Base Tier 3. Now, do you remember the group name that we set up? What was it again? Test POI, I think, wasn't it? That's what we need to put instead of Drone Base POI Tier 3. We need to put Test POI. So that's as simple as that. Faction, Xerax, no shield reload. The shield will not recharge once it's depleted. Is important, needs to be there to ensure that the game does spawn it. Only remove that or set that to false if you don't really care if the POI appears or not. Then there's the biome that it appears in, Grassland. The max min count of said POI, just the one please. Init power, is the power on when it spawns in? True, yes. and some properties such as how far does it get discovered, how far does it appear on the HUD, and the music it plays when you get near it. Lovely. So all of this stuff you can kind of reverse engineer from other existing YAML files. So self-learning is kind of important when you're dealing with YAML files. See, again, kind of like how you did with the POIs earlier, open some up, see how they tick, see what they do. Anyway, now that we've added test POI to this YAML file, let's give it a quick save up here. That should be all we actually need to do in order to get the game to spawn in our POI and for us to test it. So let's give that a go, shall we? Let's head back into the game and then go to Start Game, Single Player Scenario. We should see our POI test scenario. Let's just go ahead and start that. And it should pop you down somewhere on a planet, a little like this. You can use then commands like God mode, TT for teleport, and map to reveal the map. Shift right click over here. I think did I turn it off? I think I did. Never mind. Shift right click to teleport to where the base is. Going around here somewhere. The north maybe. There it is. It seems to have spawned in. Seems to have spawned in reasonably correctly, although I think we do actually have a little bit of terrain artifacting going on, and that may be because I need to enable the fill topsoil thing. Perhaps. Oh, it did. Okay. Well, that is precisely the sort of terrain artifacting that I was trying to avoid. But never mind. That seems to have done that. We've also got a problem where the spawners seem to be spawning regardless of the switch being switched on, which I think might be a bug or some kind of limitation of the spawners. Linking them to signal logic doesn't seem to limit them being switched on. Still, the turret is on at the moment. So if we quickly whip ourselves out of God mode, press up against that, that nicely destroys itself. We can flip that switch. And now we can see what should happen is the doors open at the front, which they have. But what we should also see is our turret has switched off, which it has. Double check that our switches here and here open the secondary doors, and then we've got access to the core and a nice box of loot. And there we go. That's our POI is working, well, albeit with some buggy spawners that seem to ignore signal logic. At least the little red light is blinking away. As for getting these spawners to do what I wanted them to do, I'm not sure. If you know in the comments, please do share the knowledge, share the love. Perhaps the spawners just need to be configured to an area of effect thing like the motion detectors. Because each of these spawners has a area of effect. You can see in this sort of little... it's just like the motion sensor configuration. You know, you can make the box bigger or smaller. So you can actually configure the exact spawn range that they will spawn at if you want to. And that might be the only way to go with those ones rather than linking them to signals. Of course, the other possibility, actually, now that I think about it, is that it's the spawn pad type that I've chosen. Let's give that a go, actually. Let's replace that spawner with one of these pad type spawners. Set the signal logic of that one to backdoor. Set the device to off. And let's leave it as a Xerax shotgun, Xerax minigunner, so that we can differentiate. It is off. It is linked to the backdoor switch. Let's go ahead and test that instead. Now, if you make changes to your base, you will need to go back into your blueprints folder and pick up the EPB file again. Copy it to your content, scenarios, POI test, prefabs folder, and overwrite the existing one with the new one to pick up any changes you make ready for testing. You'll have to do that every single time you make a change to your POI. You will need to update the EPB file that is in the scenarios prefabs folder. Okay, so this time our robots are spawning. Yeah, everything spawns. Okay, that does it. So spawners you can't actually link to signal logic. That sucks. That really does suck. First time I've actually tried to do it. Basically all previous attempts I've done by just setting the spawn distance. It is a shame. It is a shame that it doesn't work. But you will find if you are starting to build POIs and mess around with YAML files and stuff that there's a lot you can't do. There's a lot you can though, and once you get the hang of what is possible and what not, you can actually create some wonderful things, as we can see already in the game and in the sort of extensive scenarios and stuff, such as Project Eden, Reforged Galaxy, etc. Some of the POIs that you guys create out there are remarkable. Hopefully, this video has helped some other people maybe be inspired to create their own POIs. Obviously, once you've tested it like this, you can then put the finishing touches on it, pretty it up, texture it, make it look nice, give it a kind of backstory and so on and so forth. I did manage to resolve the little terrain artifacts actually by removing the terrain removal option there. So because it's not an underground base at all, I don't need to remove the terrain. It'll place it on the terrain, flush with the ground, as we can see, and that terrain there is not actually removed throughout. So that removes that little kind of gapping issue that we had, but it does also mean that we have a little bit of terrain bleed going in, but it doesn't look like it's causing a problem, so it's fine. There we go. The filler blocks are doing their job nicely. But yeah, we could now probably strap some extra turrets on this base, make it look into something, I don't know, like a relay base or something, and give it a nice sort of level 1-ish presence in the game. If you're happy with your POI, you've tested it and it works how you want, or as best as you can get it, now is the time to give it a proper name. You can obviously rename it to whatever you want to call it, and change its group name. Now, again, my suggestion is you change the group name into something that already exists in the game, such as your Xerax ones, Epsilon Main, or Orcs 2, Orcs 1, Defense 1, Defense 2. You've got each house of the Xerax available to you, including Epsilon, Ghost, Gist. There's a new one, actually. Gist, don't use Ghost. They don't use those anymore. Gist, and the other ones I can't remember, but they're all there somewhere. You've got the Polaris ones as well, Industrial Orcs, Logistics Orcs, Main, so on and so forth. The Talon are the same. Use an existing group name, and the game will choose your POI at random out of those with those group names to spawn on planets as you explore. That obviously does give a little bit of an element of randomness to it. So if you definitely want your POI to appear, then you're going to have to do what we did here, give it a unique name, and then add it to the YAML file of the planet that you want to add it to. And that is an incredibly complex and broad subject that I cannot cover in this video. But essentially, the very basic level of what we did today is what you would need to do just in the appropriate file for the planet you wanted to add it to. Honestly, the easiest thing to do is to add it to an existing group and then go and find it. Adding it as its own POI, custom POI, well, I guess you could reverse engineer the YAML files, the existing YAML files, find a unique structure in there that's already in there, copy that entire section and then add your own group name to that. But yes, I don't really want to get into that. It is incredibly a long, difficult thing to try and explain. So if you can, use existing group names. Your POI will then be added in randomly on various planets, and you can find it that way. But that is essentially, ladies and gentlemen, how to build and add your own POI. Yes, the one here is I've not gone into very much detail with. It is purely just an example, but hopefully will give you an idea of how to get started in building your own POIs. And again, like I say, reverse engineer those existing ones. Find out how they tick. And there is actually a work in progress guide on the forums that I'll link down below by Vermilion on how to build POIs. It's still a work in progress. It's sort of a half complete blog at the moment, but it's definitely worth a read what he's got there already. I'll link to that down below. If you're going to be building your own POIs, definitely check it out. Hopefully this has been somewhat useful, somewhat hilarious because it is a total car crash episode, and somewhat entertaining maybe, perhaps. I don't know. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.